can't tell what's more diabolical. PM announcing 2 new Gregor IDs 2 months in a row during an event where he is literally unusable, or Faust, when given an ego for a VAV abnormality, doesn't get one at the same level or even a 10th, but her 5th Hey. And while I get that Ishmael's Ardor Blossom Star is also a Hey, she's only got 4 of those, and none have to square up against Project Moon's oldest game balance nightmare, Fluid Sac. But before I start reanimating dead arguments, let's address the main question. Are these 2 any good? Short answer? Yeah. Gregor the Centipede Samsa has given charge what it's needed for years. Actual teamwork. And this stupid moth could frankly inflict a max of 1 damage to every enemy it hits per coin, and I'd still consider running it in a burn team. And since I'm sure y'all want me to back up that claim, let's put some evidence behind it. Ardor Blossom Star Faust is a Hey Wrath ego whose main function is to do to burn what Deathrights did to Rupture, turn enemies into living bombs. But like I was saying earlier, this info alone already tells us what this newest ego's biggest drawback is. It's a Hey Faust ego that doesn't heal HP. For those unfamiliar with the topic, this specific ego slot on this specific center may be the most contested one in the entire game up to now, which means that the Discord Mothman here needs to pass the test of being able to punch Fluid Sac in the face and live to tell the tale. Because meme or not, Fluid Sac's considered one of, if not the best ego in the game for a reason. So let's take a quick history lesson. And yes, I promise it's relevant for whether or not you should get this sucker. To keep it simple, this ego is the poster child for healing ego and probably the reason that any ego that heals allies going forward caps out at a certain number. See, Project Moon had some wishful thinking, putting the ability to heal HP in a whopping 25 SP to all sinners, no matter whether you're in a fight with 5, 7, or hell, maybe even 8 once we get to the White Torture Nest. That's a real thing, by the way, look it up. The point is that any ego that wants this Hey slot has gotta compare to Fluid Sac to see some use, with 2 other candidates attempting to basically be it, but for offense and with an extra taste of passive healing. And while both of these see some use, PM learning from their mistakes and also time-locking Command Meltdown, meant that they functioned as healing ego but really only fell into a certain niche. But as the old adage goes, whole-assing one thing is more effective than half-assing 2 things. So even if one of them had way better clash power, neither were able to top the Sushi skin suit. And don't even get me started on Telepult. That sucker was dead in the water with Faust barely having any charge to use it with. Like seriously, I don't care how on lock multi-crack Faust is, 3 seasons later and her furry days are still a mark of shame instead of being redeemed. And while I'd say Heathcliff pulls it off the best, Carmen kinda tainted that idea for everyone in Kanto 6, so Don Quixote is the only one that came out of this phase okay. Sorry, hold up, where were we? Right, Ardor Blossom. All that to say is that any ego that gets this slot has either gotta have a reason to replace Fluid Sac as a healing alternative, or be so good on another team that you're willing to say no to basically K-Corp in ego form. So then, what did Ardor Blossom Star choose? This ballsy sucker said screw it to being a healer or supporting a keyword and picked an ID to ride or die with. Literally. ABS matches up especially well with Faust's LCE ego, which is known for 2 things: being a solid burn unit, and cosplaying as Ran from Kanto 4, including her finale. This ID may not stick around forever, but is incredible at building burn potency and can get up to 5 attack weight with her skill 3 too before croaking. So this new set of abs here looked at that and said, what if you could tank that? Unsnuffed Embers is this ego's passive, which has the special trait of applying immediately after the skill is used, instead of on the next turn. It allows her to inflict more burn potency on enemies based on the amount of burn on herself. And when using her special skill 3-2 that archives her Discord account, changes that effect into one that heals her and gives her both blunt and wrath damage up on the next turn. Considering that LCE Faust's burn potency application is already mad high, being able to increase that by anywhere from 1 to 3 more per instance makes her a more clear and present menace while on the field. Depending on where this caps out, she could apply anywhere from 8 to 15 burn from her skill 1 if the value goes as high as 3. And hell, even more if we factor in her skill 3s. That being said, my best guess is that this buff caps out at 2. Considering that the potency buff is worded as for every X burn instead of at X plus burn, this confirms that her buff is gonna be more than 1 extra potency. 3 would make a hell of a difference, but 2 feels like the safest bet. But of course, the main benefit is the death defiance here. As cool as this is, I wouldn't go around treating Faust like she wants to live quietly so soon. Chances are this is a once per encounter effect, maybe 2 if we get a miracle. And hey, you ain't gotta take that from me. Just ask Lord of Hong Yon Hong Lu's kid. Even if it doesn't say so on the preview, the precedent is that you only get 1 extra shot at life. So, make good use of the buffs that come with it, cause it's practically giving you a prescript on what move to use afterward. LCE Faust's only Wrath Blunt skill is her skill 3, and she's unlikely to use it twice in a row without MD prep. But this ego is a Wrath Blunt skill, so they're trying to tell you to use it a second time. And the funny thing about that is that you've got good reason to rerun this supernova, cause both the Awakening and Corrosion make use of a custom status called Embers. And yes, I was serious when calling this Burns version of Deathrite, but not so serious when I said this didn't support a certain keyword. Embers is a great ability, but is worded in a pretty roundabout way. So I'm gonna take a creative liberty and use some placeholder numbers to explain it here. It's applied by the last coin of both the Awakened and Corroded version of this ego, with a certain amount of potency and count applied at the start. Let's just say it gets 3 of each for now. Once an enemy's got Embers, every time you wail on him with a move that inflicts any kind of burn, that count goes down. And once count reaches X, which we'll say is 0, 3 things happen. Burn activates on the enemy, Ember's potency goes down, and if Ember's potency is still high enough, count resets back to 3 from our example. But differently, Embers puts a fuse on the enemy that causes a bomb to go off after you hit them with enough burn moves, and it has the forethought to reset the bomb afterward under the right conditions. Now, as cool as that sounds, especially with Buckshot Merceau still on the banner, how good this will be on the field will depend on the numbers. Don't worry too much though, we can still set some expectations. Unlike Deathrites, Embers have both a potency and a count value, so that's probably why we don't get to see how much there is of each in the kit. But if we take our 3P3C example from earlier and assume that this effect activates at 0 count and resets with at least 1 potency, that means that you get to activate burn 3 times with 9 qualifying hits, which is very possible against a boss in a single turn with a burn team. But if we change that count amount to 1, then that means burn will proc once per hit, making it easier to do damage quickly. And if you do the reverse and set potency to 1 and count to 3, well, that's only 1 burn activation. But I guess there's still some time to build up more burn potency that way. In short, the higher the potency and lower the count, the more often you can activate extra burn without reusing the ego. And even if these little X and Y values at the bottom end up not being 0 and 1, the rule stays the same. As long as this move inflicts 2 more embers than whatever this Y here is, I'll personally be happy. And finally, we've got the skills themselves. You would think I'm burying the lead with saving these for last, but the move itself ain't really that complicated. Here, I'll show you. Ardor Blossom Star Faust's Awakening is a 2-coin, 3 attack weight skill that gains final power based on the total burn on Faust and her targets, that applies burn potency and count to herself after the attack, with wrath damage up the next turn if she has enough burn. The first coin will inflict burn on hit with some extra based on the wrath resin, and the second coin will inflict burn count by the resin, as well as embers if Faust has enough burn on her already. Going off the clash power of the other 2-coin Hey Ego we got, chances are this sucker hits between anywhere from 18 to 25 at its strongest. Well, okay, technically Fell Bullet can get up to 30, but sorry not sorry, I'm not expecting an ego powered by Heathcliff's organs to be a good comparison. What is a good comparison though is that this ego is like every other skill on LCE Faust, where it inflicts more burn on her and gets stronger if she already has it. So despite canceling her detonation at least once, she's still gonna eventually reach that familiar state of having 30 burn and 1 HP the more often you use it. Other than that, keep and watch on what this X on the last coin is will help you tell if you're ready to use the ego and start cycling your ember. Or you could choose an alternative option. The only thing is, I personally would not clash with this corrosion at all. With 3 regular coins, 5 attack weight, and a final power buff on a corrosion, this thing's looking like your typical minus coin skill. And the reason I say clashing with the sucker's a bad idea is because the coin effects are virtually the same as with the Awakening, just focused on burn count instead of potency, and reserves inflicting ember on the 3rd coin. That means that if this move loses any coins in the clash, none of them are going to receive any embers. Now, to cover all bases, there are some effects after the attack that may change this. Sure, she's putting her hand on the stove again to give herself burn and some wrath damage up, but she's also got this effect to heal SP after the attack, all the more so if she has more burn than HP. So it's possible that this corrosion chugs more SP than your average Hey Ego and heals a lot in turn, just so that the move itself can be more powerful when it's in use. But then again, both of these skills do improve final power, so it's just as possible that both of these use plus coins, or both use minus coins. I can't rule that out. Even if that's the case though, solitude to my head, I wouldn't bet on it being either of those. Chances are, you'll use this corrosion if you can afford to just have one sinner not clash with someone that turn. And that's everything the Eco's got in store. Overall, I'd consider this worth putting in over Fluid Sac, specifically if you already have LCE Faust. It slots in very well as a skill 4 that happens to cost SP and Sin resources and allows her to deal more damage both while she's alive and after she explodes. So with that in mind, here's the vision I'm seeing. Phase 1 is the same as it ever was. Build up SP, Sin resources, and especially burn. You don't really need to think about how to do that since all of her skills will apply burn potency, count, or both. Afterward, check for how much burn that awakening needs to inflict embers on the enemy, and if Faust is able to reach it by using the ego, go ahead and run it. Otherwise, let that corrosion rip if you think all 3 coins can hit. Once that's done, you're good to keep playing her as normal, getting that burn slowly, and then all at once up to 30 potencies so she lights up the sky without setting herself beyond it. From there, you can use that Wrath and Blunt bonus to re-up the embers for the targets, and lastly, rinse and repeat those moves until she really explodes in a fiery blast that hopefully leaves the rest of the team in a better state. It's just that simple. Now, I'd definitely suggest this build alongside the Magic Bullet Otis and Hornet Merceau IDs, both of which you can still get until the next update, by the way. And then both of the Yoheishu are useful for getting coins off for Ember, alongside Liu Yi's Song, since he's just great at giving SP to a burn team. And normally this is the part where I'd focus on what could ruin this drop, but silly me, guess I'm not used to working with egos in these videos yet, cause we already kinda did that with each part of the drop anyway, huh? Hope that Ember potency is high, and that the count is low, and that the Awakening can get over an average of 22 clash power, that being the current average of similar ego with 2 coins. Everything else that we don't already know and as important as these deeds. But now that we're done burning the candle at both ends, it's time to talk about the man whose entire life can be summarized as narrowly avoiding death. Lobotomy Ego AADD Gregor is a charge unit with Rupture Flakes that has all the potential energy of a fresh car battery with the damage potential of a freshly and violently thrown car battery. That is to say, he's a solid charge team support, but is capable of dealing a respectable level of damage too. More than anything though, he just can't die despite having the demeanor of someone who's been dead inside for a while. You know, also like a car battery. And to hammer that point home, he's got 4 different custom statuses, all related to charge. The first one here is actually not new to Limbus, introduced with Multi-Crack Heathcliff of all IDs. That is Photoelectricity. When the unit with its hit, the attacker gains charge count equal to the stack with some extra if they're a little low. Oh, but pardon me, why bother being vague when we have the exact numbers this go around? This sucker maxes out at 3 stack and will give 3 additional charge count if the attacker has 5 charge count or less. So if this is maxed out, a 4 coin skill will take your nugget from 0 to a whopping 15 charge count. And thankfully, every attack other than his skill 1 will apply some amount of it. Then there's the High Voltage Exoskeleton, which is a fancy name for Better Charge Barrier. Since Charge Barrier normally acts as a shield that gives the unit some charge count for how much is left at the end, this status is expected to be the same, but more. Maybe it's in more shield, maybe it's in more charge count at the turn end, and maybe it's both. But either way, it's worth expecting an upgrade considering this is the undying caterpillar we're dealing with. Next, there's Charge Sting, which is a status that effectively acts as fragility to charge moves. The poor soul unfortunate to have been inflicted with this by Worm Gregor's skill 3 takes more damage from skills that gain or consume charge count, all the more so if they're Envy. You'll just want to time it right, since this status starts to drop whenever the relevant skill hits it and at turn end. So depending on how high this percentage number gets, it could be anywhere from a new flavor of fragile to a charge mark of death. Either way, it's worth watching for on the field. And lastly, it wouldn't be a shock centipede unit if Greg couldn't extend his lifespan by another turn or two. Self-charge is a status that's best explained by Gregor's Undying Persistence passive. Alongside a few effects we'll get to later, Potentiality Man will get self-charge when his HP would otherwise drop to 0, and he can't die until his emergency charge runs out. The amount he gets is based on how much charge potency he has, and it'll get spent whenever he finishes attacking, finishes getting attacked, or when a turn ends. On the upside though, he'll get some charge count for every self-charge lost, and final power is a flat buff as long as it's active. There ain't any rules against healing him back up either, so unless PM is planning to rug pull us, you can get him back into the green with enough planning. Just keep in mind that this is a death defiance mechanic, so don't expect to activate it more than once per encounter. Oh, and while we're on this passive, Johnny Blue Bomber Jacket here will get 1 charge potency for every 10 counts spent, and will get additional speed after he gets enough charge this way. There might not be any speed-based buff on him, but you won't see me complaining about him wriggling faster. Moving on to the other passives, Alternating Discharge Support buffs Greg's synergy with 2 additional kinds of units, Ego Gear IDs and his AEDD Ego. If there are enough IDs in the fight that use Ego Gear, all of them get an amount of offense level up. And considering that he's a charge unit, I can think of 3 wallps that are in sharding distance that might go well with him. But beyond that, he'll also get a buff to his AEDD Ego's passive. For those unfamiliar, AEDD Gregor has a passive called Alternating Discharge that will activate when he gets a heads hit. At the cost of 2 of his own charge count, he'll give 1 count to an ally. It's nice enough, even if it's inefficient, but if you douse that effect with some self-neglect, Hogor can instead spend shield or HP to give the charge count instead. Now the catch is, it'll only work if his charge is low enough and his HP is high enough, so don't go expecting him to actually put himself at risk just so Ryoshu can feed her little spiders. Nah, instead he's more of a backline support, and his Sin-powered passive removes any and all subtext to that claim. Take the Lead, I'll Provide You Support is what I'm expecting to be a Sin-owned passive that'll give Greg charge count at combat start. And then at combat end, he'll essentially use his AEDD Ego's passive en masse to spend some of his charge count to transfer half of it to whoever has the lowest charge count and also is in an earlier deployment order. So if you want this to always go to a certain unit, you could set Greg at deployment 2 and say R-Corp Rodion on deployment 1 so that she can speedrun get in charge and stop inflicting migraines via friendly fire. But if his friends are dead or if he's in first deployment order, he'll nix the whole idea entirely. And the same will happen once he's gotten to a high enough charge potency, mainly because of the second effect of this passive. Now this little bonus only applies if there's enough Gloom or Envy resin in play. He'll give some charge count welfare to folks in a higher deployment order than he is next turn. That ability also affects more allies based on the resin and prioritizes the earlier deployment. But if he's at enough charge potency, he'll just give charge count to allies, period. Now I'm taking this to mean all allies rather than changing the amount he gives, but the wording is a little vague here, so it could go either way. But supposing you think he needs to be more selfish, which is entirely valid by the way, he's been through a lot. He can gain charge count on himself if there aren't any other allies in a higher deployment order. Fingers crossed that's because he set him to deployment order 1. Now, the funny thing about this second effect is that it makes me feel certain that 5-hour Gregory here is powered by stocked sins instead of resin. Yeah, I mentioned it before, but the reason is that I don't see how an ID would be made expected to have one resin get its base effect, and then allow another resin to get a bonus. If the second effect only mentioned activating on Gloom or Envy but not either, I could see that match in the base. But if this needs, say, 3 Gloom resin, that would mean if you had 4 Envy resin, you wouldn't get either effect since Gloom isn't activating the base passive. Now, egg on my face if that's how they handle it, but if that's the case, don't expect him to be chucking Energizer batteries at his allies in RR1 since you only get 5 skill slots total. And it'd be a crying shame to keep him from being at his best potential in there of all places. And then last but not least, we've got Defibrillation, his support passive. This one allows allies to heal by how much charge count or unique charge they've consumed this turn. It's a nice bonus that is specifically made for a charge team and might make a case for putting Greg as the first in the backline. At least as long as he's not like Hornet Merceau and only uses this twice per encounter. Regardless, we're already getting a sense that this ID can be played in different ways based on the deployment order he's in. He can go in the backline as a healing support and then give out charge count like orange jelly soda when he's on deck. He could go in slot 2 if you want him to dote on a specific headline ID that is just so greedy for charge. Or you can let him take center stage at the first deployment order so he more quickly builds charge on himself. As of now though, we've only seen that charge potency be used for saving him from being buried inside a Radio Shack or helping share even more charge count. If you look at his skills though, there's an entire other use for generating his juice. You know, it's not every day I see a set of skills so unified in their focus, so that's why I'm glad that every, and I mean every single skill on this ID benefits from the bolted bug having charge potency. For instance, let's start with the guard. Wait, let me try the voice. this ego gives defensive capability as uniquely superior is both true and effective at making me want to punch this man in the face. Now, no need to worry about him getting actually hurt, because at combat start, Gregor will get high voltage exoskeleton to protect himself and extra coin power based on his charge potency. He'll also gain charge count and aggro to that skill slot. See, one to punch him was all diegetic. Funny thing about that though, this last effect's a little odd, because normally aggro would be given at the start of the next turn, since the idea is to know who is being targeted before the turn starts. So gaining aggro in the same turn after that's been decided is, well, it's making me scratch my head a bit. We talked on stream about how this might mean that unfocused volley or additional attack weight may be moved over to Greg this way, but I can't really confirm that's how this works. Genuinely, I don't really know what the purpose of this is, so I've got faith it's either a typo or some kind of interaction I just haven't experienced yet. So if anyone in the comments has a good example of an ID or time where this has come up before, I'd really love to know. But even if the man with the sister we all forgot about is better at defending, he's doing himself a ton of favors in generating that charge potency. Electric Release. Did anyone actually remember that he had a sister? Electric Release is his skill 1 that deals more damage based on his charge potency, which I'll just give up and call charge now. He gets more coin power based on charge, clash power based on charge count, and generates count both on use and when hitting with either coin. DC Inversion is Greg's skill 2 that keeps the charge power damage and coin power buffs from the skill 1, and will turn the last coin into a UB if you've generated enough of it. And the skill also consumes charge count to gain base power, which is really cool, since base power is one of the most reliable buffs you can give to a move. The first coin generates Rupture count, the second generates charge count based on, what else? Charge. Rupture potency is also here. And the third coin is our first instance of inflicting photoelectricity and applies more if palette swap charge bug has enough charge. And if I had to guess, it's the same amount of charge as it needs to be an unbreakable coin, which again is a really cool way to guarantee inflicting the status that can generate massive charge count. Like, okay, I've put about 12 hours into these kits now and might be losing it a little bit, but seriously, I like this skill a lot. It's elegant, it encapsulates what the ID is supposed to do, and I get to say Rupture when explaining it. Kit reviews are so cool, man. I love life. I also enjoy high voltage current discharge. Gregor's skill 3 will give him high voltage exoskeleton at combat start based on charge when used. And charge will also give the skill more coin power, convert the last coin into a UB, and consume count to empower the skill for more coin power. The coins themselves will generate charge count on the first two, and then the third coin will generate Rupture P and C alongside photoelectricity with the same clause as the skill 2 to inflict more in the moment. And finally, the last coin will inflict charge sting based on the amount of charge on Greg, and will inflict it next turn as well if he, again, has enough charge. So in case it hasn't been made clear, this man wakes up swallowing a vat of battery acid for breakfast, cries it out through lunch, and by the end of the day has generated more charge potency than W Corp Otis could hope to if she were stuck on a warp train for the full ride. He is good at converting things to charge. And his greatest reward for it? Well, if you have enough charge when using his skill 3, he converts it into his skill 3-2 maximum output ultra high voltage current discharge. This electric grand finale has 3 unbreakable coins and 3 attack weight, but will convert that weight into more damage if and you don't use all of it. With enough charge, he'll gain coin power, and with enough charge count, he'll consume it to gain both base and more coin power. And if you happen to have any count left over, this move will truly make use of the maximum output by turning it into more damage. Then the coins themselves will inflict rupture count and potency, while the last inflicts good old photoelectricity and what I assume to be more charged sting than the base skill 3 with the same next turn clause with enough charge. In short, this idea believes that a rising electric current raises all mind whips. He sees the plight of charge units up to now and how they have acted all like islands, simply relying on themselves to remove indiscriminate, or reach their most powerful skill, or use 2 turns just to put up a shield so that you can juice as much charge count out of getting hit. If there's one thing I can confidently say about AEDD Gregor the ID, it's that he is the first that says, take the lead, I'll provide you support. Above all, he is kindness, and this is his vision. Bored. Listen, I'm here to give a lecture, not start a religion. Phase 0 of using this ID is deciding the deployment order. While there are fringe reasons to put him in a multitude of slots, I'm going to treat this board as a starter trial and say he can go in slot 5. That's enough to get 4 IDs higher than him to get his buffs while still allowing him to eventually get 2 skill slots. Put him in an earlier priority if you want him to be more offensive, or a later one if you want him to focus more on support. Now, phase 1 is your regular SP and Sin generation phase alongside gaining charge count. All that's important here is that if Greg's ever at 10 or more count, try to run either his skill 2 or 3 so that he can start spending more of it. Then once you got him in a better mental state and enough Sins to fuel his passive, or his ADD ego if you're feeling spicy, you can let that ego rip so that Gregor can start passively giving charge count to his allies. Or at least do it easier than if you don't have it. Whether or not you use the ego though, you can now move on to phase 3, benevolence. While Gregor will naturally generate more charge potency on his own over time, he now has all of the tools necessary to start acting like a philanthropist, applying photoelectricity to any enemy you want to have your other charged units attack to, well, recharge. Oh wait, hey, so that's what the speed is for. But that begs the question, how long does he stay in this phase for? Well, the answer is kind of complex. Modern charge units tend to have 3 thresholds of charge potency abilities that are anywhere between 2 and 6. So while unfortunately we can't be sure of what the thresholds are for all of the abilities, we can know of 3 thresholds that are related to his skill 3. Those are the thresholds in order to get the most out of his regular skill 3, the threshold to upgrade his skill 3-1 to his skill 3-2, and the thresholds to get the most out of his skill 3-2. Now, the way I see it, this Gregor's gonna stay in this phase until really you get tired of him sitting on the sidelines. So whenever he reaches that charge potency level to get his skill 3-2, that's usually your sign that he can start doing more. In other words, phase 3 is all about doing what you can to target the poor sap that you want the greatest number of allies to hit, both so they can get hit with charged sting to take more damage, and photoelectricity to keep their best moves live. On top of that, you could try to have Greg stick with either skill 2 or 3 to get that bonus from the Gloom and Envy res, and yes, this is one of the more thoughtful and less win ratey IDs to come out as of late, but once you get tired of thinking, or you get everyone online, or you want to see Gregor use Rosepan Erodion's weapon but better, you can chill out, move on to phase 4, and unga bunga any moves other than a skill 1 to ramp up his charge, so he can finally make the most of the skill 3-2. And from there, he's at maximum output, basically on autopilot, since many of your allies are either close to online, or just plain there by now. Which brings us to our final question, what could ruin him? Well, aside from the regular 15, 20, 25 clash power thresholds, it's actually really hard to ruin this kind of ID. He doesn't rely on just doing damage, or just staying alive, or just generating charge count for others. Sure, he's good at all 3, but he even has several ways to meet each of those goals. So even if, say, his sin-powered passive is disappointing, or he doesn't get a lot of charge count from his funny charge barrier, he still has photoelectricity and an upgrade to his ADD, if you're willing to count that. The only smoking gun I could see truly ruining this is if his charge count generation for himself is too low, since generating at least 6 charge count per turn is pretty average, and I'd expect this unit to be above average in that regard. But if we factor in all the passives he has, I heavily doubt they're gonna mess that up here. Oh, and don't worry about his rupture application. It's a mirror dungeon keyword, that is all it needs to be. He's enough, and he always has been. I may be asleep in the next hour. Let's see. How about y'all though? You feel like something was missed, or do you plan to pull for these suckers? Let me know what you think. And now, here's the member and patron Q&A. Alright, today's member and patron Q&A comes from Shocktanian12, who asks, what would your favorite potential Walpurgisnacht or House of Spiders ID be? Well, since we just had Walp, I'll go ahead and think about what I'd prefer from House of Spiders, and I can't front, I fucking love Valentina, man. She's so utterly despicable, and the way that her character ends up going by the end of Kanto 9 is perfect. Exactly what needed to happen with her. Ugh. And with that in mind, I think it would be perfect for Roja to get that ID because it's all about her having so much promise, and then one way or another, ending in the worst manner possible. I swear, for a while I thought they forgot about that being her motif after Time Killing Time, but they just really keep hammering that home, especially with the last Walp, and man, something's gotta give on that soon, right? Also, a Liu Roja upscale would be pretty nice, and I'd like to see how they implement the Eye of Odin.